dawn broke over DeWitt County like a blade being drawn from a scabbard, slow, gleaming, and promising violence. The first light slid across the low mesquite tangles and prickly pear patches, brushed the tops of buffalo grass still jeweled with dew, and caught the rust-red dust that never seemed to settle on this part of Texas. The air tasted of damp earth and woodsmoke, and somewhere high above, a hawk cut a patient circle in the quiet sky, as if deciding where death would be required today. There were mornings in the frontier West that carried silence like a prayer. This was not one of them. This one carried expectation, the kind that clings to a land too young for peace and too old to plead innocence. The Civil War had ended on paper, but not in hearts, and certainly not in the thorn-choked pastures outside Goliad and Cuero. Men rode home with empty stomachs, rusted rifles, and eyes that had seen too much to believe in gentle futures. Former Confederates returned to burned fields, salted grudges, and a law left broken by war's retreat. In DeWitt County, the soil had barely cooled from the last burial when the next bullet demanded another grave. In those first uneasy months after surrender, the question across Texas was simple: who now held authority? The one answer no one liked but everyone understood was this: a man with a gun and kin at his back. DeWitt County was Scotch-Irish country on one side. Taylors and their allies, proud, stubborn, hard-boned settlers who believed honor was a currency that never lost value, even when the national currency had. Their people had been forged in centuries of border feuds, from the green hills of Ulster to the pine barrens of the Carolinas. They lived by clan law more than statute books. To be wronged was to remember was to answer. Opposite them, men of the Sutton faction, cattlemen with soldiering still in their posture, many former Rangers, some with Union ties or sympathies, others simply drawn to Sutton's sense of order. William Sutton had fought under the Lone Star and believed in the badge, even if the badge had been poorly backed by the wreckage of Reconstruction. In another time, in another place, these two pillars of frontier strength might have stood together. But accusation is dry tinder on prairie wind. And here, in the first uneasy days of post-war Texas, it only needed one spark. It came whispered through stockyards and over campfires, first cattle missing, ropes cut in the night, hooves tracked across riverbank mud. At a time when beef on the hoof was the only bank account left standing for many families, the idea that someone, especially someone from across the creek, had taken what wasn't theirs was enough to stoke hell. No one could say who started it. Or rather, everyone could, and every answer contradicted another. Sutton men swore the Taylors branded stolen beeves. The Taylors spat in dust and declared Sutton's men liars and bullies, wearing lawmen's coats without a judge to swear them in. The first shots were not fired from dueling pistols at 30 paces, nor in dramatic showdowns in the street. They were fired from within cedar thickets, behind live oak trunks, from the backs of horses in the pale half-light before dawn. They were shots meant for killing, not warning. At Bitter Creek, the feud found its first dead. It was an ambush, remembered in the way old men talk over whiskey and boys learn to fear the names on gravestones. 2 Sutton men were fired on as they crossed the creek, the water low and gold-brown beneath the rising sun. The sound of gunfire rolled across the valley like thunder that had forgotten where the sky ended. When the smoke cleared, blood slicked the creek stones. Hooves churned mud and water like a pot being stirred, and the only witnesses were startled cattle and that same circling hawk, now drifting lower, interested. The dead lay where they fell, one face down in the shallows, the other clutching the reins of a horse that had bolted, dragging him lifeless into a mesquite snarl. No funeral hymn, no doctor, no magistrate, just vengeance waiting patiently to be fed again. And it would be. Women wept beneath live oaks that afternoon, skirts darkened by dirt as they knelt in sorrow. A mother traced the still cheek of her son and murmured prayers that sounded more like broken bargaining than faith. Widowhood came swift on the frontier. A woman might scrub her husband's blood from the porch in the morning and have to fix her mind on planting corn by evening because, dead or living, the homestead demanded labor. Across the scrubland, grief did not soften men, it sharpened them. Rifle barrels were polished, colts re-oiled, horses shod for long nights and longer grudges. There exists in an old settler's diary from DeWitt County a line that has passed into local legend, not exact perhaps, but faithful in meaning. Out here, men judged faster by gun than God. It was not written in pride, nor in shame. It was written like one describes a storm, inevitable, indiscriminate, and without mercy for those caught in its path. The pastors in the little wooden churches preached forgiveness on Sundays, but 6 days a week the land itself whispered another doctrine. Hold your pride, guard your kin, trust iron. When dusk pulled long shadows across the prairie that evening, men sat silent at supper tables, hands hovering near their belts, eyes glancing toward doors that would never feel safe again. The cicadas droned. Coyotes barked on distant ridges, and the wind carried somewhere the echo of a gun still waiting to be fired. The feud did not roar to life in a single moment, it smoldered. But that morning on Bitter Creek gave it breath. Blood had been spilled, and blood is a seed that sprouts more of its kind. The earth of DeWitt County drank deep, and it would not be satisfied soon. Word traveled as fast as hoof could carry it. From roundup camps to clapboard saloons, from church porches to lonely line cabins, one truth rolled like a gathering storm cloud. This was only the beginning. And as men sharpened knives and loaded paper cartridges by lantern light, a name began to drift across the prairie, soft at first, then harder, like a boot heel on gravel. Gunman, drifter, son of the South, and storm-given flesh. The kind of man who didn't follow trouble, he preceded it. His name moved in whispers, and every whisper made the land hold its breath a little tighter. Texas was a tinderbox, and someone had just struck the first match. There are places in history where civilization frays not with a scream, but with the slow tearing of cloth. DeWitt County, 1869, was such a place, a land where the law arrived on horseback only to find justice already spoken by riflemen. The war was done, but the reckoning was not. Texas stood ragged between surrender and statehood restored, between courthouse and cattle pen, between oath and instinct. In that uneasy vacuum, men ceased asking who was right. They asked only who could bleed the other first. Fields that had once grown corn now bore only mesquite and memory. Fence posts leaned tired in the sun, like veterans leaning on crutches. Across the prairie, chimneys stood where houses had burned, stone ribs of dreams gnawed bare by time and gunpowder. No blue or gray uniforms, now only homespun shirts, sweat-stained hats, and eyes too aged for their years. It was in that cracked soil of peace, denied, that the feud grew teeth. When the county sheriff could no longer be trusted, not by both sides, not at the same time, the badge lost shine, and the rifle gained it. Judges rode circuit when they dared. Some refused. Others prayed harder and traveled faster. Those who swore to uphold the law found themselves reading Scripture with one hand and cocking a hammer with the other. A local schoolmaster, one of the rare literate souls who learned both letters and fear, wrote to his sister, "We have courts on paper only. Out here justice is as scarce as rain." In August, neighbors no longer knocked. They called from the fence line, keeping saddles under them, watching windows for movement. Trust died first, and when trust died, suspicion moved into its house, shut the door, and loaded a shotgun. Into this tangle rode Jack Helm, former Confederate, horseman, hunter, and man, more at ease with straight lines than gray areas. With Reconstruction politics swirling like dust devils, he was named a state police captain, a kind of lawman born of desperation, answerable as much to fear as to statute. Helm did not come with diplomacy. He came with lists and rope. He believed in order with a fist behind it. The frontier is not often fond of sermons, but it respects certainty, and Helm wore certainty like plate armor. He questioned with the muzzle of a Colt and judged with the trigger. To some he was salvation, to others he was a nightmare with authority. Helm's men cut down suspected rustlers as one prunes diseased branches quickly to save the tree, though no one agreed what the tree was anymore. Tailors spat at his name. Sutton men tipped hats to him in the streets. Helm himself rarely looked anyone fully in the eye. He seemed always watching the horizon for the next threat. Paper warrants? Hardly worth the ink. A whispered accusation could hang a man before dawn. In the language of the frontier, justice rode armed and unblinking. The Taylor clan answered, not with petitions, but with powder. They moved like smoke, never still, never obvious. Fence rails cut as signals. Lantern hung in a barn, loft meant danger. A scrap of red cloth tied to a mesquite limb signaled safe passage. Old border tricks, forged in Ireland and Carolina hills, now weaponized under the Texas moon. They struck in quiet places, first a man shot while watering horses, a rider found slumped over his saddle, reins dragging, chest soaked. They favored ambush, not because it was cowardly, but because it was efficient, and they did not fight for glory. They fought for blood equity, an eye for an eye, and sometimes the other eye to settle accounts. Sutton men answered in daylight, sun flashing off rifle barrels, dust plumes towering like storm fronts behind galloping hooves. They wanted the world to see vengeance served. To them, clarity had value. A dead tailor in the road sent a message. Wives learned to cook with rifles, leaning beside the hearth. Children fetched water with revolvers tucked into belt loops that did not yet fit their narrow hips. The line between play and peril blurred. Boys whittled toy rifles while the men oiled real ones by lantern glow. A mother in Cuero was seen once hanging laundry with one hand while the other held a shotgun. She hummed a lullaby as she worked not out of cheer, but to keep her babies calm when hoofbeats passed the gate. Out on lonely homesteads, men dug firing holes into cabin walls. Dogs barked not at strangers, but at the lack of them. The land itself seemed to lean forward, listening. Men who once shook hands in church pews now crossed the street rather than meet eyes. Weddings carried tension like thread in the bride's veil. Funerals grew so common that preachers sharpened eulogies like a doctor sharpens a scalpel. Gun oil and grief have a smell when mixed, sharp, metal sweet, lingering. It clung to DeWitt County like humidity. Helm kept his rope handy. Tailors kept their rifles closer. Suttons rode patrols as though they marched in enemy territory, for they did. A boy of 14 memorized hoofprints instead of verses. He could tell a Taylor horse from a Sutton mount by the depth of its stride and the angle of its heel in sand. That boy would grow silent and old before his time. The hawk that circled each dawn now dipped lower, wings catching the light in a flash of brass and omen. Nothing explodes forever, but it can simmer without end. As the second year of vengeance rolled forward, the feud began to feel less like anger and more like gravity. Men didn't ask if they would be pulled in, only when. And somewhere beyond the horizon, riding loose in the saddle, restless as thunder on the plains, a name already spoken in saloons and whispered in kitchens began drifting closer. John Wesley Hardin. He had not yet arrived, but rumor travels faster than horses, and rumor said he was coming. The land shivered in anticipation. The wolves now had a scent, and they were hungry. Morning found the prairie in a hush that did not belong to peace, but to exhaustion. Dew clung to bluestem like sweat on a man who has ridden hard all night. The cicadas had not yet begun their chorus, and even the mockingbirds seemed reluctant to speak into the heavy quiet. A thin mist hovered above the Guadalupe bottoms, veiling the cottonwoods and live oaks like mourning shrouds. Into that stillness rode a man Feud and here had met. But many would learn to follow not because they loved him, but because he did not bend. Most called him Little John, though not to his face, not twice. He was not little in spirit nor in resolve. He simply stood a hair shorter than the giants who had ridden with him. Slim as a fence picket, shoulders straight as a rifle stock, eyes pale and steady, the kind of gaze that did not wander or doubt. He wore dust like a coat, and his sidearm sat low, not as ornament, but as extension of duty. The Rangers did not always wear uniforms, but they carried an air that civilians recognized, discipline mixed with danger, patience welded to violence held in reserve. Armstrong carried that like second skin. He did not gallop into Cuero. He did not announce himself with spurs ringing or pistol high. He rode quiet, hat brim shading eyes that measured everything. Hoof tracks near the livery, the way men leaned when they spoke on the porch of the general store, the absence of laughter in a town too young to be so old. He saw fear, and he saw pride, two fuels that rarely burned clean. He dismounted not at the saloon, but at the church well, drawing water with the slow efficiency of a man who had done such things in harsher places. Soldiers who had seen Appomattox, Comanche country, and the border scrub learned that grandeur means little, thirst kills louder than bullets. When he drank, he removed his hat. Respect costs nothing and buys more than ammunition. A wrinkled woman sweeping the church steps eyed him with suspicion and hope braided together, like rope with a weak splice. "You Law?" she asked. Armstrong drank again, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I try to be." "That enough?" He looked past her to the road, to the horizon, to the future. "It's a start." Armstrong came not as avenger nor preacher, but as observer first. He walked without hurry. He listened more than he spoke. In a town where every sentence risked bloodshed, silence became his greatest weapon. He did not ask who had stolen cattle. He asked whose fences needed fixing. He did not inquire about gunmen. He asked about water levels in the creek. Men found themselves answering before they realized he had asked anything at all. From those fragments, hoofprints in sentences, dust trails in memory, he learned the lay of this feud. The Taylors, proud and quick to take insult. The Suttons, orderly but not innocent. And the driftwood between them. Drifters, opportunists, men who rode behind violence like coyotes behind a trail herd. He found that here a man's name traveled faster than his horse. Everywhere he walked he heard whispers, "That's him, Armstrong. The Ranger. Texas sends hunters now, not sheriffs. Better hope he's on your side." But Armstrong had no side but Texas, and Texas meant law, not vengeance, not vendetta. Yet in a land where vendetta felt older than prayer, that was a dangerous Section P creed. He lodged in a small room behind the mercantile, woke before sunrise, and spent hours writing fence lines, creek bottoms, and scrub valley trails. He read spoor like others read scripture, hoof depth, broken twigs, the direction cattle drifted in night wind. From mountain man journals he had once studied by firelight, he remembered lessons of wilderness law. The one who sees first lives longer. The one who speaks last decides better. Armstrong applied mountain craft to human terrain, tracking boot prints as if they were elk, noting tobacco ash beside wagon ruts, observing who watered horses, where and with whom, reading gun smoke on morning wind for distance and direction, studying whether men ate in peace or with backs to walls. The mothers and widows of DeWitt County, weathered souls with worn hands and brave silence, trusted him first. He sat on porches, accepted coffee, listened to grief without offering borrowed comfort. One widow looked him in the eye and said, voice like cracked leather, "My boys are in the ground. I don't need revenge. I need it to stop." Armstrong nodded, hat in his lap. "It will." She believed him. Not because of his tone, but because he did not say when. Helm had ruled with fear. Armstrong ruled with inevitability. He made no threats. He made no speeches. He only asked questions like a man sharpening a blade, slowly, patiently, knowing sharpness matters more than speed. In the saloon one evening, a ranch hand tried him boasting about gun skills, nudging his holster, testing for temper. Armstrong finished his drink, eyes steady, voice mild as prairie dusk. "If I need to shoot you, you'll never see me touch the gun." The room froze. Pride swallowed, challenge died. The hand muttered something and left. Armstrong returned to his coffee. A ranger's reputation is not carved by boasting but by restraint. By week's end, he knew the names, the grudges, the graves. He walked the road to Bitter Creek and stood where men had bled into shallow water. He did not speak. The wind rustled mesquite like prayer shawls in a storm's breath. He felt the weight of the feud settling like a storm front on his shoulders. But he did not fear storms. Winter-born will does not bow to weather. On a porch that evening, an old cattleman spat tobacco juice and squinted into the twilight. "You think you can fix this, Ranger?" Armstrong checked the sky. The hawk flew low again, patient, hungry. "No," he said, "fixings for blacksmiths. I'll end it." "How?" "By outlasting every man who believes bullets solve eternity." The old man grunted. "That'll take time." Armstrong nodded. "Then time will be my weapon. Far beyond town, a rider crossed the prairie, loose rein, easy seat, like a man who never hurried because trouble always waited for him. His name rode ahead like thunder, John Wesley Hardin. Armstrong had not yet met him, but he felt the wind shift when that name passed among the mesquite. The wolves of DeWitt County had torn flesh freely. Now a hunter had entered their country, quiet, patient, certain, and armed with something rarer than fire in Texas, the intention to see the end, not just the blood. There are men whose names travel faster than hooves across prairie, carried not on wind, but on fear. When John Wesley Hardin crossed into DeWitt County, his legend rode beside him like a second shadow, one shaped by rumor, sharpened by alcohol, and baptized in gun smoke. They said he killed a man for snoring. They said he outdrew 3 rangers in a saloon. They said he could smile and shoot in the same breath, and the bullet always hit truth before the story did. Most legends are exaggeration. Hardin's were merely unfinished. He was young still, barely more than a boy to the old ranchers, but the war had forged boys into iron before their voices deepened. Hardin rode light in the saddle, one hand easy on the reins, the other never far from his Colt Navy. He dressed plain buckskin vest, worn boots, revolver smooth from handling. The only ornament he carried was his confidence. Hard men respected him. Wiser men avoided him. Mothers saw him and pulled their children inside. When he arrived at the Taylor camp, a low valley ringed by live oak, he dismounted with the ease of a man who never assumed he was welcome, but never asked permission either. A few Taylor cousins watched him with the wary curiosity of wolves, unsure whether a new wolf was ally or alpha. Creed Taylor himself, patriarch, war-weathered, jaw set like chiseled mesquite, studied Hardin from the shade of a tree. "You come to help us?" Creed asked. Hardin looked around, measuring faces, distances, weapon placements. The wind rattled pecan leaves overhead. "I come because folks say your enemies are breathing," he answered. In another time, another place, men might have called that arrogance. Here, it was simply currency. Armstrong heard the whisper before he saw the man. A ranger learns to read rumor like a scout reads hoofprints. Saloon keepers grew quiet when Armstrong walked in. Women at laundry barrels paused mid-ring. Young men lowered their voices, fearing their bravado might become their epitaph. Hardin's here. God help who crosses him. God help us all." Armstrong did not tense. He did not rush. The worst mistake a lawman can make is to chase a storm better, to place yourself where it must pass. He sat in the shade behind the livery one afternoon, cleaning his revolver with a calm so deliberate it made nervous men sweat. A ranch hand approached, hesitant. "You hear who's come?" Armstrong didn't look up. "I hear many names. This one ain't like the rest." Armstrong slid the cylinder back into place, checked the action, holstered the weapon with a soft click. Only then did he speak. "Every man bleeds red." The ranch hand swallowed. Not him. Armstrong finally lifted his eyes pale as winter sky. "Then he will teach the ground a new color." Hardin didn't strike first, he never did. His violence came like lightning, uninvited, righteous in its own mind, immediate. The Sutton men braced themselves, watching tree lines, riding with rifles across saddles. Children peered through cracks in cabin walls, as if the sight of a killer would somehow prepare them for the sound of a shot. For several nights nothing happened. The prairie held its breath. Even the coyotes seemed to go silent, as though sensing a predator that stalked not flesh, but certainty. Armstrong, meanwhile, moved quiet along creek beds and through thickets, learning the ground where fate would eventually demand payment. He spoke to old lawmen who remembered Indian campaigns, to freedmen who worked cattle but trusted no white law, to Mexican vaqueros who knew the dirt like scripture. "A gun tells truth," one vaquero murmured, "but truth always leaves widows." Armstrong nodded. He did not hate Hardin, hatred clouds aim. He didn't fear him. Fear tightens the hand and spoils judgment. He simply understood him. A man convinced the world owed him blood cannot be argued with. He can only be met with patience harder than pride. On a dusky evening painted orange by dying sunlight, Hardin walked into a Cuero saloon. The room tensed. Chairs scraped softly. Cards halted mid-air. Boots shifted subtly so spurs sat clear and hands free. Hardin ordered a whiskey. The barkeep's hands shook only a little. Armstrong entered 15 seconds later, not hurried, not theatrical, just present, like a fact you didn't want but could not deny. Hardin glanced toward him, curiosity flickering like match flame. "Ranger," he nodded. "Mr. Hardin." 2 men, both armed, both capable, both certain. The air thickened. A fly buzzed, landed on the bar, thought better of it, and left. "You here for me?" Hardin asked, voice level. "When the time comes," Armstrong said, "I'll be the last man you see." Hardin smiled slow, appreciative, dangerous. "I don't plan on dying, Ranger. No one ever does." The saloon did not exhale until both men turned their backs. Hardin to his drink, Armstrong to the door. Only legends and fools turn their backs on each other. That night proved which was which. Word of the meeting traveled faster than prairie fire and dry wind. Some swore the 2 men would kill each other before dawn. Others wagered Hardin would flee. A few whispered Armstrong would shoot Hardin in his sleep. They did not yet know the Ranger. Armstrong didn't hunt that night. He sat on a porch, lantern unlit, polishing the same rifle he had carried since the border wars. A slow ritual. The kind a man performs when he knows violence will come and refuses to greet it unprepared. Somewhere across the dark prairie, Hardin sat by a fire, whittling wood into shavings, smiling at a joke only he heard. 2 predators, one seeking justice, one seeking legend. Texas held its breath. Soon the guns would speak. There are battles won with bullets and battles won with breath. In DeWitt County, as the feud reached its fever pitch and Hardin's shadow stretched long over the prairie, John Barclay Armstrong chose breath, not softness, not surrender. Patience sharper than steel. The land wanted a reckoning. The men who tilled it and bled on it were ready to pay in powder and lead. The tailors sharpened their knives in quiet cabins. Sutton men rode with rifles across their thighs and slept with boots on. Every fence post felt like a gallows rope waiting to be tied. Armstrong saw it all and refused to draw first. He knew a truth as old as the fur trappers who mapped the Rockies, as certain as Jedediah Smith writing by firelight after losing comrades to arrows and hunger. Rushing to kill often leads a man exactly where his enemy wants him. He would not rush, he would starve the feud. He began small. No posters nailed to church doors, no mass roundups, no speeches atop courthouse steps. He sent small notes, handwritten, precise summoning men to appear before magistrates. Not to hang, but to answer. The law, shaky as a newborn foal, would stand again. Or it would fall in the attempt, but it would not go untried. When ranchers muttered, "Ain't no judge lived long enough to sit a trial here?" Armstrong only replied, "Then I aim to improve longevity." He didn't threaten, he reminded. When a Taylor cousin refused a summons, Armstrong didn't storm his cabin at dawn. He rode out alone, tied his horse quietly, and sat on the man's porch. Noon sun, hat brim low, rifle across his lap. Said nothing, drank water from his canteen, waited like time itself. By dusk the man opened the door, sweat and pride battling on his brow. "You fixin' to bring me in?" Armstrong shook his head. "You'll ride in with me." The man swallowed, and I saddled up. Word spread, not of intimidation, not of cruelty, but of inevitability. Helm's rope had swung justice like a sledgehammer. Armstrong's justice was a file slow, relentless, wearing through stubbornness. He met men in fields, at river crossings, in smoke-filled kitchens, listened to wives who'd buried too many, sat with old settlers who remembered the Comanche moons and said, voice trembling, "We built this land just to kill each other?" Armstrong replied only once, "No, we built it so our sons don't have to." At night he worked by lantern, not writing sentences, writing systems. Small ledger books, neat script, names ties, grievances, crimes witnesses, likely retaliation paths, not to punish, to prevent. He was not dousing fires. He was draining the prairie of kindling. They gathered them in ones and twos at first, then by the dozen under a sprawling live oak 3 miles outside Cuero. No whiskey, no fancy coats, just men with dirt under their fingernails and dust in their lungs. Taylor men on one side, Sutton men on the other. Between them, rifles stacked like church candles no one dared light. Armstrong stood in the center, hat in hand. He didn't shout, he didn't plead. He pointed to the children standing at the tree line, boys holding slings, girls balancing on fallen logs, watching with wary eyes. "That," he said quietly, "is who buries us if we fail." Silence. Not agreement, but thought. In Texas, thought is a seed. Grow it, water it with truth, and maybe if God and grit agree something, living comes of it. No treaty was signed that day. But men left with slower tempers than they'd arrived with. Hardin watched from afar. He didn't sit at Armstrong's councils. He rode the edges, like a lone wolf evaluating whether to join the hunt or kill both sides and feed alone. One evening, as stars stitched silver across the sky, Hardin said to a tailor lieutenant, "Your ranger ain't trying to kill the feud. He's choking it." The lieutenant spat tobacco. "You scared he'll win?" Hardin smiled, soft, cold, thoughtful. "I don't fear men who plan slow. I fear the day they finish planning." He touched the butt of his Colt, "And I don't wait for that day." He rode off into the dark, a ghost among live oaks. Armstrong heard later Hardin had spoken such words. He only nodded. A man in a hurry meets his own bullet first. It was not the men who first softened, it was the women. One widow, hair streaked silver, though she was not yet old, rode to Armstrong's door. She brought no rifle, no anger, just weariness like a stone in her chest. "My husband died in this. My brother, too. I got 2 sons. They ain't dying for pride." Armstrong stood, hands uncrossed, respectful. "What do you need from me, ma'am?" She lifted her chin. "I need you to win." He tipped his hat. "Yes, ma'am." The feud did not end that day, or that week, or that month. But men who once woke to kill found themselves waking to pasture cattle, repair fences, mend roofs. A strange feeling crept in responsibility. Armstrong didn't break the feud. He starved it, not by force, but by weariness, logic, and time, the hardest weapon to wield, the easiest to lose faith in. And as the months grew hotter, as mesquite blossoms turned to thorned seed pods and the buzzards circled for different prey, a subtle truth settled over DeWitt County. The wind was changing. And in Texas, wind decides wildfire's fate. Somewhere beyond the ridges, Hardin still rode, waiting. But the land he expected to be tinder was slowly, steadily becoming stone. The wolves had begun to lose their hunger. And the hunter? He was still there. Still patient, still polishing his rifle by lantern light. Soon, fate would demand blood again. But this time the law intended to choose when and how and who. The hottest summer in memory settled over DeWitt County like a fever God refused to break. Dust clung to throats. Water troughs dropped inch by inch. Grass turned the color of old parchment. And yet, in this parched season, the feud began to thirst less for blood. Armstrong's slow justice, quiet, relentless, unglamorous, had worked like a tourniquet, not healing, but stopping the bleed. Men still carried rifles. They still spat in the dirt when the other faction's name was mentioned. But they did something odd. They hesitated. On the Texas frontier, hesitation was almost a miracle. Still, fate has a way of testing peace the way wolves test a fence. And in late summer, fate chose Indianola, a port town, all salt air and boardwalks, where seagulls cried overhead and wind carried brine instead of dust. William Sutton, weary, gray around the edges, but unwilling to abandon the badge, boarded a steamboat. He meant to leave the feud behind for good. Tailormen trailed him to the docks. Gunshots cracked like lightning off the bay. Sutton and his companion, Gabriel Slaughter, fell where planks met tide. The wind blew their blood into the foam. News galloped faster than any rider. Before the bodies cooled, before the sun dipped, before widows could scream or mothers faint, word reached Cuero. They killed Sutton. Men who had sworn to hold fire felt old fury roar up like mesquite set alight. Pistols were checked, horses saddled, hatbands tightened. The air thick with that familiar terrible electricity, the kind that precedes thunder or execution. For a moment, just long enough for breathing to hurt, Texas hovered on the razor edge of forever war. Armstrong rode out before dawn, dust kicking behind him like ghost smoke. He did not shout orders. He did not puff his chest. He simply arrived, presence heavier than any gun. He found a group of Sutton riders at the creek, Ford eyes wild, pride wounded, weapons hungry. "Move aside, Ranger," one spat. "We're hunting murderers. You're hunting ghosts and graves," Armstrong replied. "We owe them blood." "No." Armstrong's voice was quiet, like a church before hymns. "You owe your dead better than to join them." The men bristled. "Grief makes fools brave and cowards reckless." "What if we say that ain't your call?" Armstrong swung down from the saddle slowly, boots touching earth like verdicts. "It is my call. This killing stops here." A hand twitched near a gun belt. Armstrong didn't flinch, didn't blink. "You draw," he said softly, "and you bury your whole family line. Not from bullets. From history forgetting you as murderers instead of men." Silence. Hard. Bitter. But holding. They backed down. Reluctantly. But they backed down. And DeWitt County did not burn again that day. Hardin didn't fight here, not this fight. He had ridden elsewhere, drawn by his own orbit of trouble. But his legend still stalked the county like a fever dream. When the day finally came that Armstrong faced Hardin for real far from DeWitt, in Pensacola, the world would remember it. But here, now, his absence mattered more. The shadow that had darkened the prairie lifted. The wolf of this feud had slipped away, leaving lesser beasts with smaller appetites. The tailor killers of Sutton fled, scattered like quail flushed from brush. Some were arrested by rangers. Some disappeared into Mexican dust. One was found months later, drunk and raving in a border town, claiming he could still see Armstrong in every shadow. "Rangers don't hunt men," he slurred. "They haunt them. The ranger star leaves a mark deeper than a bullet." Trials followed. Not spectacles, procedures. Rough, simple, but law, not vengeance. Men stood in courthouses with their hats in hand instead of behind rifle barrels. Actual juries spoke. Sentences were given. Not all were hanged. Some served time. Some walked with warnings. Justice, imperfect but present, returned to Texas like rain to 20th drought. After one sentencing, a widow approached Armstrong outside the courthouse. Her dress was faded black, threadbare at the hem. She held a small Bible worn, creased, pages soft from prayer. "This was my husband's," she whispered. "He died thinking his boys would have to kill or be killed." She placed the Bible in Armstrong's hand. "You proved him wrong." Armstrong did not weep. Rangers rarely did, but he bowed his head, thumb brushing the pages where dried blood had once smeared a verse. "Blessed are the peacemakers. There are verses earned, not preached." Death did not vanish from DeWitt County. But it slowed. It lost hunger. Men returned to ranch work. Children played stickball instead of war. Church bells rang louder than gunshots. And for the first time in years, the hawk circling the prairie coasted on calm wind instead of hunting fear. The feud, starved of arrogance and oxygen, collapsed into history's quiet grave, not with a roar, but with a sigh. Armstrong rode out one morning, the horizon stretched gold ahead of him. A younger ranger asked, "How'd you end it?" Armstrong watched sunlight spill across the mesquite. "I didn't," he said. "Time did. I just kept men from making widows while time worked." He nudged his horse forward and buried the last bullet before someone fired it. Texas exhaled. The wind changed. And somewhere far away, John Wesley Hardin rode on, not yet knowing a reckoning still waited for him down the line, not by bullet, but by a ranger who did not forget. There are battles that fill tombstones, and there are battles that fill silence. DeWitt County learned the second after it tired of the first. When the guns cooled and the dust settled into the ruts of old wagon tracks, there was no parade, no cheering crowds, no victory toast raised beneath the live oaks. Just quiet. The quiet of fence wire being stretched again, the quiet of hammers tapping nails into barnwood, the quiet of cattle lowing at dusk and dogs barking at distant coyotes. Life, like prairie grass after drought, came back slow, stubborn, and without asking permission. Men woke not thinking of vengeance, but work. Hands that once polished revolvers now mended harness leather. Eyes trained to watch for ambush now watched cloud lines for rain. And those who lived long enough to grow old learned painfully that peace is not the absence of violence, it is the discipline of refusing its invitation. On a cold evening months later, Armstrong sat alone in a small room above a mercantile store, lantern glow flickering like tired fireflies against plank walls. In front of him lay his ledger, the same leather-bound journal he had carried across the frontier, pages filled with names, dates, trails, suspicions, and hard-earned truths. He turned to a page marked only by simple script, no flourish, no sentiment, just a line beneath it, "Peace favors stubborn men." He closed the book gently. A ranger's record is never a boast. It is a responsibility one carried like a saddle sore, felt long after the ride is over. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled the shutters. Armstrong did not shiver. He had ridden through Comanche moon raids, through border stampedes, through outlaw country where a sunrise meant you had survived the dark. This victory, quiet, unheralded, weighed heavier than all of it. Because bullets do not haunt a man, but decisions do. The graves remained, by the creek where the first shots rang. In family plots behind sagging homesteads, under live oaks where shade fell like velvet and wind hummed through Spanish moss, mothers brought flowers that wilted faster than grief. Children learned names carved into stone before they learned sums or letters. Widows traced dates with calloused fingers until memory and granite blurred. Some nights, coyotes howled across the prairie, and old men swore the sound carried the feud's last echoes, the cries of the proud and doomed. Not hatred, not anger, weariness. It was said a Taylor woman once knelt beside a grave and whispered, voice breaking, "Pride took more from us than bullets ever did. No historian wrote it down, no newspaper printed it." But the land remembered. The prairie remembers everything. In the years that followed, the feud faded into story, first into porch talk told by men nursing coffee at dawn, then into cautionary tales told by fathers to sons polishing spurs, eventually into something whispered around campfires, half myth, half memory. Children asked, "Who started it?" Old ones answered, "Men who forgot what peace was worth." Time smoothed edges, but not lessons. A young man once approached Armstrong in later years, eager, shining, pistol on his belt, like a badge of honor rather than burden. "Sir," he asked, "what is the way to end a feud?" Armstrong did not speak for a long moment. He took the pistol from the boy's hand, not rudely, but with the gentleness one uses to move a rattlesnake from a child's path. "There's two ways," he said. "One is quick, loud, and digs a lot of graves. And the other?" Armstrong set the pistol aside. "Harder," he said. "Takes swallowing pride instead of whiskey. Takes showing your back without reaching for iron. Takes believing the man across from you is tired of burying kin too." The boy frowned. "And if he ain't tired?" Armstrong stood. His bones cracked slightly, the sound of too many nights on the trail and too many winters sleeping rough. "Then you outlast him," he said. "Outthink him. Outweight him. Let the land fill his anger, but leave his soul empty of targets." He paused, then spoke the truest sentence he ever gave. "Son, every fool can shoot. It takes a man to stop shooting first." Armstrong would later ride against rustlers in the Nueces Strip, against desperados on the Rio Grande, and one day famously into a train car in Florida to bring John Wesley Hardin to heel. That story would make the newspapers. This one never did. Because a gunfight is loud and sells well, but saving a county without firing much lead? That is too quiet for legend, too humble for dime novels, too steady for song. And yet, under the live oaks of DeWitt County, where Spanish moss sways like baptism cloth and cattle graze where men once fell, there lies proof that the hardest frontier victories are the ones without trophies. The ones where nothing happens because someone strong refused to let it happen. Armstrong mounted his horse one last time as dawn stretched thin light over prairie grass tinged silver with frost. A hawk lifted from a fence post and soared into whitening sky. He tipped his hat, not in triumph, not in farewell, but in respect for the land, for the dead, for the living who now had a future. Then he rode east, boot heels clicking, a calm shadow on a pale horse. Behind him, Texas did not cheer. It simply breathed. And on that cold morning, for the first time in years, breath was enough.